There's speculation that this could be a Jubilee that I think some of the speculation is even that um that the Jubilee, I think there's every year somebody is speculating that it's the Jubilee year. And that's why I'm like, I don't know. I just don't know. But there's speculation that the Jubilee actually started in the fall and that the release wouldn't happen until Nissan, which is coming up this weekend, coming up into next week. So that's one thought too, is that that it could be a Jubilee year. And it could, I don't know. But it is specifically tied to Israel being in their land, the Jubilee. And so here, Leviticus 25, when you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the seventh year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years. So then it's the 7 times 7 for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. And then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the seventh month. So that would have been Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement in last fall is what they're saying. So that would have been last fall, the Day of Atonement. And you shall make the trumpet sound. And so that being beginning to announce the Jubilee year. And the thought process there that it's announced then, this happens every 50 years. So it's announced then, but that gives people the time from the fall to the spring to prepare to actually allow the release to happen, because that's a lot. That's letting slaves go free. That's letting original land go back to its original owners. That is a lot goes into that. So every 7 cycles of 7, or 49 years, the 50th year, or the Yovel, or Jubilee. The word Yovel means ram's horn. So Jubilee literally means ram's horn. That's pretty cool, because the shofar is blown on Yom Kippur to announce the Jubilee year. So the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. Leviticus 25, 23 through 24. Again, who does Israel belong to? God. It belongs to God. And this right here is why God is so against any moving, any parting, dividing of his land. He's very much against it. Again, the land shall not be sold permanently. And this is even amongst Israel. This is amongst his people. He's saying this. For the land is mine, for your strangers and your sojourners with me. And in all the land of your possession, you shall grant redemption of the land. So he set this in place every 50 years so the land would go back to its original tribe ownership. During the Jubilee, the land continues to lay fallow. It is not harvested or sown. So it's released, and its original owners, all debts and all slaves, are made free. So the purpose of the Jubilee there was to allow the land and the people to rest and to secure the land that belongs to each of the 12 tribes. Again, this is about Israel and her tribes. I mean, you think about it, when Jesus returns, this is what he does. He divides out the land by the 12 tribes. You see this in the later chapters of Ezekiel. It was the living picture here of forgiveness and restoration. It was a living picture of what would happen at the end. Jubilee has not been kept since before the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel. So get this, okay? Jubilee has not been kept since Israel was a unified kingdom under King Solomon. It has not been kept. One of the reasons for the exile was that Israel did not keep God's sabbatical years, including the Jubilee years. Remember, that's why 70 years, Babylonian captivity, because of the 490 years, they never kept a Sabbath, never kept a Shemitah, Sabbath year. Today, it's not kept because it is believed Jubilee can only be kept if all 12 tribes are living in Israel in their respective land. And so that comes from an interpretation of Leviticus 25:10. So this is why the Jews say today they can't do it because they're not in their land in the first place. Leviticus 25 in their respective lands that were allotted to them, I should say. So Leviticus 25:10, and you shall sanctify the 50th year and proclaim freedom for slaves throughout the land for all who live in it. And it shall be a jubilee for you, and you shall return, each man to his property, and you shall return, each man to his family. Now, I just want to stop because that right there is super cool. And that is going to happen when Jesus returns. And I can see how that could be a pretty cool picture with the rapture too. But we see that actually playing out for Israel when he returns as King of Kings, because then he parcels out the land and each of the tribes actually go to the land that he gave them in the beginning. So I lean toward the fulfillment being the millennial reign of Christ, that when he comes back as King of Kings, he does this. When Jesus's first coming, he partially fulfilled Jubilee. He set the captives free. But the fulfillment will commence when he returns to set up his kingdom. The actual physical playing out of this will happen. Reclaiming the land of Israel as its original owner and releasing all debt, all prisoners, all slaves when he returns. Colossians 2:13 through 14. And you who were dead in your trespasses and uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven all of our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands, that he set aside, nailing it to the cross. And so he already set us free. We have each had that Jubilee moment. Of course, the rapture will definitely be a Jubilee moment for us. Jubilee is the year of the Lord's favor. And the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 61, we see this explained further, where God tells us more about Jubilee. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. This is Isaiah 61, and we will look at this. Jesus quoted this. Because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and to bring the day of vengeance of our God. Now, when Jesus quoted this, he stopped short of that. To comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. All this happens when he returns. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. Strangers shall stand and tend your flocks. Foreigners shall be your plowmen and vine dressers. But you shall be called the priest of the Lord. They shall speak of you as the ministers of our God, and you shall eat the wealth of the nations. And in their glory you shall boast. Instead of your shame, there shall be a double portion. Instead of dishonor, They shall rejoice in their lot. Therefore, in their land they shall possess a double portion. They shall have everlasting joy. So this happens in the millennium. This happens when Jesus returns as King of Kings. And see, notice here, this is in Luke 4, where Jesus reads this. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And then he closed the book, and he gave it again to the minister, and he sat down, and the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. He stopped just short of declaring the day of vengeance because it wasn't time yet. He declared the acceptable day of the year. He had come, he set us free by his death on the cross, but it wasn't the day of vengeance yet. He knew that was to come at his return. I've also heard some compelling thoughts that this could begin at the rapture, since Jesus's reign will begin with us in heaven. And I think this is a neat thought because King David, he was king for 7 years over Judah before he became king over all of Israel, over the entire kingdom. And so I thought that was kind of a neat picture there. But regardless if the Jubilee is fulfilled when Jesus returns at the end of the tribulation, or if it begins at the rapture, it's a really neat picture of how he is going to, when he does return at the end of the tribulation, he's going to set everything up just like what you would do with keeping the Jubilee, all them going back to their original tribes. So right now we're going to look at 100 Jubilees of human history, because this is another evidence here for the 6,000 years that's given to man, and then the millennial reign. So God told Moses, he told Noah, he said, I'm going to limit man's years to 120. God gave man 120 years before the flood would come. 120 was the end. That's when the flood came. Jesus says when he returns, it'll be like the days of Noah. And there may be more there than we realize. 120 Jubilees. There will be 120 Jubilees going up to the 6,000, just simple math, the 6,000 years of man. And so let's look at some of this. The first Jubilee happened in Adam's life. The third, Seth's birth. The eighth Jubilee, Noah, a new beginning. That eighth is a new beginning. Remember the eighth, when we get into the eighth millennium, that'll be a new heaven and a new earth. The 50th Jubilee, Israel entered the promised land. God knew they would wander the desert for 40 years before Israel due to their unbelief. Remember, Israel, because their unbelief, they didn't go into the promised land. They ended up having to wander the desert. Well, God calculated all that in. They entered the promised land on the 50th Jubilee. The 80th Jubilee is when Jesus redeemed mankind. That's when Jesus died on the cross. From Adam to Jesus is 4,000 years. Jesus set the captives free, declaring the year of the Lord's favor. Due to Israel's unbelief, they endured judgment for 40 years in the wilderness to be brought to the promised land on the 50th Jubilee. It was Joshua, the same name as Yeshua, that brought Israel into the promised land. And it'll be Jesus, our Yeshua, our God's salvation, that brings us into the promised land. Moses was 80 when he took Israel out of Egypt. And again, it was that 80th Jubilee when Jesus came. Due to Israel's unbelief and rejection of Jesus, they entered judgment for 40 Jubilees. It's been almost 40 Jubilees since since Israel rejected Jesus, since Jesus died for us. And they were scattered to the earth again. And they've been brought back right before the return of Jesus, right before that final 120th Jubilee, when Jesus, I believe, will be when Jesus returns as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So Romans 9:28 through 29. For he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because a short work will the Lord make upon the earth. And as Elijah said before, except the Lord of the Sabbath had left us a seed, we would have been as Sodom and been made like Gomorrah. And so Jesus is making a way. God is making a way. Hebrews 4:9 through 10. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. It's finished. And when we've rested in Jesus, we realize our work is finished. The 120th Jubilee, the end of man's days and the end of man's 6,000 years to work the earth, entering into the 7,000 millennial reign of Christ. Depending on when Jesus was crucified, we could be close to only 7 years or one Shemitah cycle away from the 120th Jubilee. The last week of Daniel's 70 weeks, I believe, is a Shemitah cycle. And so, there's some debate over when Jesus was crucified. I think most believe somewhere between 30 AD and 33 AD. So, wow, 2,000 years later, it leaves you between 2030 and 2033, and the rapture happened 7 years before. So that's just incredible to think of how close we could be to the 6,000 year mark, to the 120th Jubilee.